So the developers of Dead by Daylight made a tweet recently that at first glance should not be very controversial, but that actually has received a significant amount of backlash. If you check the quote retweets, it's not looking good for behavior in there. Everyone is roasting them. So they're asking us, the community, to vote for DBD for the Labor of Love award. This is one of several awards that Steam gives to certain games based on community voting. There's things like Game of the Year, Best Soundtrack, or Labor of Love. Other games that have won this category in the past include Cyberpunk and Terraria. These are games that have already come out, but they continue to get a lot of love in forms of patches, updates, and so on, right? So DBD is asking us to vote for their game for this category. And a lot of people are pointing out the natural contradiction of asking us to vote for Labor of Love when we just received a very buggy patch with a killer that doesn't work half the time. But I do understand this is basically DBD, how it's always been. And I'm sure this will be fixed eventually at some point, maybe in years. So this one, I don't care about as much. I wouldn't really, put DBD down just for one patch when we already are so used to this. Another thing that people are bringing up, which I think has a lot more weight to it, is the fact that this year Behavior laid off about 100 employees. And I understand the industry is difficult and these things have to happen, but the way it happened, it really wasn't pretty. I knew some of the people that worked in Behavior that were fired, and I think they were phenomenal people doing phenomenal jobs. So I was really, really sad to see that occur. And the statement that Behavior put out, that they took out sometime after, but the internet is forever. This basically was corporate speech. It didn't really acknowledge, how difficult and how hurtful it is to fire someone. So I didn't enjoy that. And I think the developers, even though it's not the fault of the devs, that's just the higher ups. That is something that, it's kind of rich to ask for a Labor of Love when a lot of people in the DBD team themselves did not get the love they deserve this year. Now, that being said, why does it feel like everyone that plays this game, even though there's so many of us that play DBD and love DBD, why does it feel like we don't love it? Why does it feel like we don't want to vote DBD for Labor of Love? Even though we spend so much time on this game, even though we obviously are so invested. That's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So before I talk about the negatives, let me at least acknowledge some good things that have been happening to DBD for the last year or two. For example, the map design has gotten a lot better. They're not perfect, but definitely way better than what we had some time ago. So that is a really positive thing. Thank goodness. The micro balancing decisions that we see on every mid chapter and in some minor hotfix chapters as well have all become a little bit more nuanced, and we see more changes every update. We used to have updates that only had like one change for one killer and 2 add-ons and 1 perk change every 3 months. Now we're getting to a point where we're getting used to getting quite a few changes and quality of life upgrades to certain perks and add-ons here and there more often. So that's awesome. I think they'll listen to their consultants a little bit more. And perhaps most importantly, DBD is getting a little bit more ambitious. We now have game modes where you can go on a completely different part of the map, separate from the normal bit, right? We have the 2v8 and other special game modes as well, like the giant Oni thing. Like, they're doing things that are different, that are bold, and that's great. And some of these you would expect from a big game, from a big company that has millions of players, right? But I think that is where the Labor of Love doesn't quite sit well with a lot of people for DBD. On the big things, DBD is doing very well. And probably for the next few months, it will still do really well. Next year, we will have a Five Nights at Freddy collab. And surely the player base will explode. We'll have a lot of new eyes on DBD, right? On the big things, DBD, I'm sure, is doing well and will do well. But on the small things that you notice when you actually play the game and not just look at the numbers, some of these things are really embarrassing to still see in the game. So these are some of the things that should have been fixed years ago, but maybe don't get fixed because the developers are just too busy caring about the next few changes, and this game is a freight train with no brakes, right? So some of the small things that I've noticed, I have a small list here. The time in general that you waste playing this game is honestly horrible. Even before you even start playing, if it's the new season and you have 2 million blood points, you have to spend about 4 minutes leveling up to spend all of those blood points. If you reach the max, obviously you waste them. So you always want to get rid of them. There's like a max limit. So 4 minutes you might spend leveling up, maybe more if you went over 2 million. It's honestly such a time waste. And for people like me that have already done it so many times, it feels so bad. And then you start playing the game and more time wasted. Someone puts you on the ground and decides they don't want to pick you up, 4 minutes until you bleed out. Survivor decides to hide during the entirety of the endgame collapse, even if you want to give them the gate, even if you want to give them the hatch. If they just decide to hide, at least 2 minutes of your time wasted. If there's 2 survivors, that could be 1 hour until the server ends the game if you don't find them before. What could also be 1 hour is if a killer decides to body block you and everyone else is dead. In a situation like this, you have to wait 1 hour or disconnect and take the DC penalty. This is something that honestly should have been fixed so long ago. Why don't survivors that have AFK birds lose their collision for like 5 seconds or something, like 1 second, just to get out of this situation? Little situations like this that are rare, but that can really, really affect the fun factor of the game should have been corrected a long time ago. And don't get me started with a lot of the inconsistencies that this game has. We still live in a world where every time you leave a generator, you can get a skill check. And this skill check is a minus 10% of the gen, can trigger a bunch of perks and other things, and it can cascade into a lot of issues. And it's such a nasty thing that should have been corrected so long ago. For example, another thing that I was surprised to learn about recently is that they haven't fixed the auto haven spot where you get stuck. So there's a crane in auto haven that spawns very commonly, and if you run it counterclockwise, you're fine. But if you run it clockwise, you get stuck in an invisible spot. I got myself killed on this spot, and then sometime later, I got a kill on this spot in the span of just a couple of days. This is something that honestly should not go months and months and months without being fixed. And sound is another thing that DBD is extremely low at correcting. Let me play a clip of me completing a generator in some random map, and then a clip of me completing a generator in Larry's. And you listen and tell me if you notice any difference. They also told us some time ago that they would look into making survivors a bit more equal in terms of sound. And sometime later, they decided that this was a bit difficult, and they told us, yeah, this is taking longer than usual. It's a little bit difficult. We didn't anticipate how complicated this was. But things sometimes just get worse. Sound changes all the time. Scratch marks change all the time. Just a couple days ago, I was playing Spirit, and I was chasing Renato, and I could not hear the survivor. I could not hear his survivor. He's very quiet. He also had Iron Will, so he was completely quiet. And his footsteps with his little sandals were super quiet. Next, I chase Feng Min, who is one of the loudest characters in the game, and I know exactly where she is at any given time. The difference between characters is still really crazy as well. And don't get me started on your eyes. Have you seen how dark this game is? This is my gameplay with filters, right? That I put on for my audience to see the game better and for me to see the game better. If I take them off, these maps are so dark sometimes. And then you go to another map and your eyeballs are burned out. I would really like to see a little bit more consistency there, and some of these things that everyday players have to deal with, I think could use a little bit more love, a little bit more attention to these small details. And maybe if we one day heard from the developers that they are more willing to slow down the big production of DLCs and the big production and focus more on these small things that make the game better, and then leave the game in a better spot, I think maybe then people would be more likely to consider nominating DBD for Labor of Love. Because right now, it's, I think, the small things that prevent us from really falling in love with a game that we've played so much.